Hi everyone, it's B007 back again with a review of Joss Whedon's new film Much Ado About Nothing, which is based on the play by William Shakespeare. So first of all, to give you some of my credentials for Shakespeare, this is a play that I think a lot of people do in school, certainly in England, at the age of 16 when you sit your public exams. And it's certainly a play that I studied in depth and love greatly. But in general, I have that English bug for Shakespeare, and to the point where when I sat my college entrance exams, which were not to study English literature, I actually did a paper on Shakespeare. So I know this play inside out. I actually read it recently just to refresh myself before the movie, and was pleasantly surprised at how much Joss Whedon had really been faithful to the text. My Joss Whedon credentials, I'm also a massive fan of Joss Whedon, because of two friends of mine, Katia and Andy, who for years were telling me you've got to watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And of course me and my snobism was like, what? I'm not watching some movie about a girl who's a vampire slayer. That sounds like the most redonkulous thing I've ever heard of. And of course, once I actually sat down to watch it, about 20 years after everybody else, I realised what a wonderful feat of writing and acting it was. And what gets me about Joss Whedon is he really is in that heritage, that vein of Shakespeare, where he can combine very funny, very silly humour with love stories and romance. And then, really dark, subversive material. And it's all combined in this wonderful kind of Shakespearean melange, where you're playing simultaneously to the hard-working punters who've paid their shilling and sit in the groundlings and just want a few bits of slapstick comedy. But you're also simultaneously playing to the educated elites who know their Roman history and want something very challenging. There's no one, I think, who's a better modern interpreter of Shakespeare than Joss Whedon. And I know that Kenneth Branagh would sort of have my head for saying that. But I think sometimes in the UK we treat Shakespeare far too reverentially. But, one could make a strong argument that if Shakespeare were alive today, he'd be doing mainstream TV. He would be going for the big audiences with the big laughs, but at the same time injecting a layer of intelligence and profundity and subversion. So that brings us to this movie, a very long preamble. And famously, we all know that Joss Whedon was directing the massive blockbuster hit Avengers Assemble. And kind of to cleanse his palate between the end of shooting and post-production, he decided to invite a bunch of his mates to his house, his beautiful house in Santa Monica. And these are all friends who are actors that he's worked with on his TV shows over the years. And really just do a wonderfully stripped-back, elegant version of Much Ado About Nothing. And Joss Whedon's basic idea was he was going to keep the text, keep the beautiful Shakespeare, just trim it down so that he could get it within a sort of 2-hour runtime, but transpose the story to contemporary society. So he's kept all the old names, but these people are in contemporary dress. And as we see from the opening shot, he does make explicit some things that Shakespeare couldn't, by virtue of the fact that we live in a slightly more modern time. But anyway, to start off with a plot, and I'm sure I won't be spoiling anything for anyone here, this is a play that's been out, I think, for 500 years now. We have troops arriving home from war, and there are two friends, Claudio and Benedict. And Claudio, coming home, realises he's in love with Hero, this wonderful virginal girl. And their boss, Don Pedro, says that, don't worry, Claudio, I will woo her for you. And when I've got her father's permission for you to marry, I will give her to you. Which is slightly sketchy, I think we'll all agree. Meanwhile, Benedict, Claudio's best mate, is having this very fiery relationship with Beatrice, who's Hero's cousin. And this is the relationship which basically is the foundation of all modern romantic comedy and a lot of those wonderful screwball comedies, because it's one of those classic, I hate you so much, it's obvious we're going to end up together in the final real relationships. And in this case, what's incredibly modern for Shakespeare, Beatrix and Benedict obviously have some kind of back history, which is sort of hinted at in the text, and that partly kind of speaks to why they're so fiery in the current time. And what comes across very clearly from this film is that she attacks him or is scathing towards him almost as a kind of preemptive attack, lest he be nasty to her. So it's a wonderful, nuanced, sophisticated, fantastic relationship. There's all sorts of emotion and power and anger in there. But as the plot unwinds, what we see happen is that Claudio is set up to marry Hero. Wonderful. So what happens is Don Pedro, Claudio, and Leonato say, you know what, we're going to get these two together. because it's evident, despite all the quarrelling, that they really do love each other. And the way we're going to battle and break down their pride is we're going to tell Beatrice that Benedict really loves her, and we're going to tell Benedict that Beatrice really loves him. And as soon as they realize that pride that is not on the line and that they're not going to have to open themselves up to vulnerability and be rebuffed, they will evidently fall in love. Meanwhile, you have the nasty, evil villain of the piece, which, this being Shakespeare, is a bastard because they're always untrammeled evil. And he decides, you know what, I just can't cope with all these people being happy and in love and blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to just throw it all to the dogs. So he makes one attempt early on in the film to sort of persuade Claudio that Don Pedro's up to no good. Finally, Claudio sees through it. But then he does something really horrible, which is slander Hero. And he's slandering her honour and her purity at a time when that's really all a woman's worth is on the marriage market. As a result of the slander, you then see Beatrice absolutely spring to her cousin's defence, and she makes this wonderful speech where she says, you know, if I were a man, I would take up a sword and defend her. And of course, now that they've newly declared their love for each other, she asks Benedict to do the defending for her. And bear in mind, Benedict and Claudio are best mates, but she basically says, look, it's me or him. And it's an absolutely critical juncture in the drama. Anyway, there's many machinations and the story winds up sort of resolving itself in what may or may not be a satisfying ending. But in the midst of all that, you have the comic relief. The comic relief is provided, in this case, by the completely incompetent police force / security guards, who actually uncover what's been going on with this nasty little plot even before the marriage. So they could have stopped all the nastiness that then follows, but no one takes them seriously. And there's a very deep irony that with all their education and cleverness, these people don't figure it out. What does Joss Whedon do with all this wonderful material? Well, to start off with, the acting is superb. We have Amy Acker as Beatrice and Alexis Denisov as Benedict. And they're both brilliant in different ways. So I feel that Benedict is very good in the comedic scenes when he's overhearing the guys sort of talking about how Beatrice is in love with him. I feel that he's less good in the heavier dramatic scenes when Beatrice makes her big statement that she wants him to defend Hero. I feel that he doesn't kind of react in the way that I would want or show enough emotion. Amy Acker, by contrast, I feel is less good, less at home in the sort of the slapstick comedy, but very good when called upon to be wronged or to feel her cousin wronged. So they're both incredibly good. And Sean Maher is exceptionally chilling as Don John. I mean, he's everything you want a Shakespearean villain to be. I also thought, Nathan Fillion completely steals this movie. As always happens with Dogberry, right? This is what we call the Papageno effect. The guy who's the comic relief just steals everybody's hearts. But he is so good in this. The guy's just a comic genius. And playing a very different character to his typically, sort of suave hero, Han Solo type characters. Here he really is made a fool of. It's not an entirely brilliant cast though. I do feel that in the roles of Claudio and Hero, the actors are less good. And particularly Gillian Morghese, I think it is, who plays Hero. In fairness, it's a bit of a thankless role. You just have to sit there and simper and be virginal, and then even when the guy you're about to marry just does a complete shit towards you, you have to kind of meekly take him back. I've happily spent more time with him on screen. The only bit of the sort of behind the camera stuff that I thought was a bit sketchy is that Joss Whedon does the music. And as we know from Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog, this is a guy who knows musicals very, very well. But I just somehow didn't feel the songs were that strong, and I was wondering what might have happened if he'd have actually got in like a proper composer. Because as we know in Shakespeare, the songs have meaning and they need to be effective. In particular, "Sigh No More," which is the sort of the thematic leitmotif of the film. But anyway, so what does this Much Ado About Nothing add to the cinematic canon? There are so many versions of Much Ado About Nothing out there in terms of TV adaptations and cinema, and stuff that's very traditional and purist and stuff that's very contemporary. For instance, there was a wonderful BBC series about maybe 10 years ago now called Shakespeare Retold, where they did what Joss Whedon's done. They put Shakespeare in the contemporary world. And the Much Ado About Nothing version, quite interestingly, stars Damian Lewis as Benedict, so the guy who's now the star of Homeland. So you can check that out if you want to see this sort of another modern interpretation of it. I really love this movie. I think it does absolute justice to the text. and Joss Whedon shows himself to have a real feel for it. And I really hope that this reignites the career of Alexis Denisov in particular, who's tremendous as Benedict. But anyway, my love of Shakespeare, my love of Joss Whedon, my belief that Joss Whedon is the modern day interpreter of Shakespeare, if not his avatar in the modern age, continues. And I know that sounds like ludicrously high praise, but I think if you look at this guy's back catalogue and the way he has with words, it's just not hard to defend that position. So if you're a Shakespeare fan, you should certainly check out Much Ado About Nothing. But even if you aren't a Shakespeare fan, don't be put off by the dialogue, because I watched this movie with someone who really hadn't seen the play before at all, didn't think of themselves as someone who would love Shakespeare. And it was just so clearly acted and so clearly blocked out. They had no problem understanding what was going on and really enjoyed it. And just looking at the cinema that we were in, which was packed, people were just laughing out loud at stuff that was going on screen. So I really hope you give it a chance and check it out. Thank you very much for listening, and until next time, have a great day.
Yeah!
I hate you like I love you. I hate you like I love you, love you, love you. I hate you like I love you. I hate you like I love you, love you, love you.
तेरे प्यार ने कर दिया दीवाना, तेरे प्यार ने कर दिया दीवाना, ऐसे दर्द ने कर दिया दीवाना, तेरे प्यार ने कर दिया दीवाना.
तेरे जैसा जालिम.
Much Ado About Nothing has a running time of 109 minutes and is rated PG-13 in the US. It played the Toronto International Film Festival in 2012 and the Glasgow Film Festival in 2013. It's currently on release in the US, Canada, Ireland and the UK, and opens in Brazil on the 5th of July. The music for this show is provided by Tosca from the album Delhi 9, tracks Rolf Royce and Dave Dudley, and the final song is from the Indian movie Delhi Belly, with the music by Ram Sambath, and the song is I Hate You Like I Love You.